The morning the street filled with thunder wasn't loud at first. It began with a low vibration under the frozen ground, a distant growl that crept through the cracked windows of a small, worn house at the edge of town. Frost clung to the bare trees like glass, and the sky hung heavy and gray, as if it already knew what was coming. A little girl stood near that house, unaware that the kindness she had shown the day before to a frozen Hell's Angel was about to summon something no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. And just before the engines finally roared into view, there was a moment of stillness that made everything feel like it might break. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of compassion, please take a second to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Only Kindness. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Her name was Maribel, and she was 9 years old, small for her age, with hands always red from the cold because her gloves were too thin. She lived with her grandmother in that creaking house near the old highway, a place where trucks passed but rarely stopped, and where winters seemed longer than anywhere else. Life had taught Maribel early how to be gentle. Her parents were gone, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, like people slipping out of a room and never returning. Her grandmother did her best, but sickness had bent her spine and slowed her steps. Maribel learned to carry groceries, to make soup from very little, and to notice when someone else was hurting even if they tried to hide it. The day everything began was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that stings your lungs. Maribel had been walking back from the small store with a loaf of bread tucked under her arm when she saw him. He was sitting on the curb near the abandoned gas station, a massive figure hunched in on himself. His leather jacket was stiff with frost, his beard crusted with ice, his hands shaking as if his body had forgotten how to keep itself alive. The patch on his back marked him as someone adults warned children about, someone dangerous, someone to avoid. But Maribel didn't see danger first. She saw a man who looked like winter itself had decided to sit down and wait for the end. She hesitated, because fear is natural, even for a child with a kind heart. But then she thought of her grandmother coughing through the night, of the times neighbors had helped them without asking for anything in return. She thought of how cold feels when it seeps into your bones. So she took off her own scarf, the one her grandmother had knitted years ago, and walked toward him. She placed it around his neck with hands that trembled more than his. She pressed the warm bread into his frozen fingers and then did something unexpected. She held his hand, just for a moment, until the shaking slowed. By the time she ran home, cheeks burning from the cold, she assumed that would be the end of it. A small act, quickly forgotten, just another moment in a hard life. She didn't know that the man she helped was named Calder Voss, a writer who had spent decades living hard, trusting no one, surviving on loyalty and anger. She didn't know that he had been on the edge of giving up, his bike broken, his body failing, his spirit colder than the air. And she didn't know that the warmth of a child's hands had reached a place in him untouched for years. That night, Calder didn't sleep much. He sat by a borrowed heater in a friend's garage, scarf still around his neck, staring at nothing. He told his brothers what had happened, not with pride, but with something like disbelief. A kid, he said, didn't owe me a thing. Just helped. The room went quiet. These were men who understood debt, loyalty, and respect in ways the outside world never did. And they understood that a kindness like that could not be ignored. The next morning, Maribel woke to a sound she thought was thunder. The house rattled, the cups on the shelf trembled, and her grandmother crossed herself in fear. When Maribel looked out the window, her breath caught. The road was black with motorcycles, stretching farther than she could see. Chrome glinted under the pale sun. Leather-clad riders stood shoulder to shoulder, helmets under their arms, faces serious, respectful. Nearly 2,000 of them had come. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Phones came out. Fear buzzed in the air. But there was no anger in that crowd. No chaos. Just presence. Calder stepped forward alone, removed his gloves, and knelt in the snow in front of the house. He held out the scarf. His hands no longer shook. What followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, heavy, and unforgettable. The riders pooled money to repair the house, to cover medical care for Maribel's grandmother, to ensure heat through the winter. They stood guard while volunteers worked, their engines silent, their heads bowed. For the first time in a long while, that old house felt warm in a way no heater could explain. Maribel didn't fully understand what she had done. She only knew that the man from the cold smiled at her like someone who had been saved. And Calder, riding away hours later, felt something lift that he hadn't known he was carrying. If this story is touching your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Only Kindness. Stories like this remind us that compassion can change lives in ways we never see coming. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please leave a comment below telling us what kindness means to you, or who you would help if you had the chance. Long after the motorcycles disappeared, the road went quiet again. But the ground remembered the weight of what had happened. And somewhere deep inside a little girl and a hardened rider, winter had finally begun to thaw.